Hey everyone. So I know it's been a while, but I want to talk about something kind of interesting. At least it's interesting to me. But this is my website. It's nothing too crazy, but there is one feature on here that I'm particularly proud of, and it's kind of invisible. There is this button to view resume, and if you look at this, I mean, it's pretty standard for a portfolio to have a PDF resume that you can download. But what's interesting about this is that this is dynamically generated by a JSON schema. And in addition to that, the library that I'm using for the PDF generation is React PDF, specifically the renderer portion of it. If you don't know, this website is a Next.js project. So because of server-side rendering, there's a little bit of, or there's some gotchas with using React PDF, which is a client-side only library. And I believe somewhere in the compatibility, it'll tell you, yeah, so in previous editions of Next.js, it would just randomly break. But I feel like it's time to redo my website, so I'm gonna go through and show what I did before and what I'm doing now to see if there's still any gotchas in using it. And hopefully it will inspire you to do something similar. Alright, so here's my new website. So it's nothing much. I just scaffolded a new Next.js application, added Shadcn and Tailwind. Nothing too crazy going on here. I did change the UI alias to common because I think it's just better organization, at least for me. And inside the main page, I just got rid of everything and just added the Shadcn button. But now that if we go into our package JSON, you'll notice that I added both the React PDF library as well as the React PDF renderer library. And I'll get to why I got the full package instead of just the renderer in a bit. But if we go back to the React PDF compatibility that I was at earlier, it will say that this section here is suggested to be added to our next config. So let's go ahead and do that. And once we paste it in, you'll get a warning in your terminal saying that this is actually no longer experimental because this is a Next 15 application. So we can move this up into the root object instead of just inside the experimental property. Like so, and that should be good to go, and that'll get rid of that warning. And from here, I'm gonna add a new page, and I'll call this resume. And this is gonna be where we want our resume or our PDF viewer. And this will lead us to our first gotcha, which I want to show right here. And I'm not sure if this actually works without a PDF document inside. So I scaffolded a simple resume document that we're gonna be using right now. This will be expanded on much further, but it's just gonna be a page that says hello world. And that should show us what problem is happening. Oh yeah, we have to actually go there. And here we are. So PDF viewer is a web specific API. So this issue is because the server side can't render this thing because it's web specific. It's not on the Node.js side. And we go back into the code, you would think all you would need to do is to export the PDF viewer in a file that has the use client directive. However, if we use this one instead, let's go back to our page and change this import, we'll hit a different error. Or not so much an error, this is more of a warning because it's still rendering, but we still get the same server error because it can't be server rendered. Also, this is tiny, so let's I can make a little fix for that. Main height, screen, W full. That'll fix the sizing. If we go back, we'll have our page easily viewable. But to get rid of this warning, we need to actually make this a suspenseful component or a dynamic component, if you will. So back in our resume index file, instead of import or exporting it like this, we're gonna need to import the dynamic module. Is that the right word? I don't know. But with this function, we could now get the PDF viewer like this, and we're asynchronously loading the PDF viewer component. I believe with Next 15, you can also add a suspense property here. But my TypeScript is saying it's not going so well, so I'm gonna instead use the loading property. And the loading property is the suspense fallback. So we can have a little bit of JSX in here, which also means I need to change the file extension here to index.tsx, but that's a minor nitpick. But now if we use this one in our page, PDF index.tsx, the warning now disappears because now we're now we're loading this in suspensefully, which is everything's all good with the world. Now I want to go back to the home page because I want to make a download button as well. And that is also another component that is provided by React PDF. And this one is called PDF download link. Oh, I also forgot to mention, you might also want to add SSR false to make sure that this doesn't try, or Next.js doesn't try to server-side render this, because sometimes it still will. But with the download link, I want to get a little bit more fancy. And here I'm just adding a disabled Shadcn button for when this suspenseful button is still being loaded in. So let's update our homepage and import our newly added PDF download link. And I believe the prop here that we want is documents, which takes in our resume documents like that. And for accessibility reasons, we want this button to be rendered as child because the PDF download link, once it's fully rendered, is a anchor tag and not a button. But then with all of that, our button now works. And we do click it, we do get a little download link. But I do want to show that if you refresh, it should have a little loading animation. Hopefully you didn't miss that, so I'm going to try to do that again. Yep, all right. Now there is one last thing I want to show in terms of Next.js specific stuff. And this is where we actually want to bring in the React PDF server library. And that's because we want to import PDF.js. And I guess this index file is a good enough place to put it. But this line of code right here is to load in and register the service worker. And this allows hot reloading, kind of. So specifically this line comes from this section of the React PDF configuration. Adding the service worker will allow us to change the contents of the PDF. Not exactly re-render the components, but just the text. Just to show how that works, I'm gonna add a prop to our resume document, and let's just do this. So then we'll render title or hello world, depending on if title is provided. And we go back to our resume page, which is here. So adding a new prop, if we save this, should update our PDF. Or not. Okay, I refreshed. Let me check if this changes anything. And it does. Okay. So having the service worker will allow you to change the contents. But if you're changing the components inside of the document itself, you will still need to refresh the PDF viewer. So that concludes all the Next.js inner workings of making this all work correctly. Now let's explore on how to make a page that, or a resume looking PDF that looks a little nicer than this. So first things first, we want to load some fonts. React PDF only comes preloaded with these fonts here: Courier, Helvetica, Times Roman, kind of like standard boring Microsoft fonts. And on the website, here is an example of how you can load these fonts. My go-to font is Ubuntu, and if I could show, this is my original website. What I used to do is put all my fonts into the public serve file folder here under fonts, and I have the actual true type font file. Obviously you can't open it in VS Code, but in the resume file, I registered the fonts manually using a get domain function. It's a simple function that just returns the base URL of wherever this is being served. That way we have access to the public directory. Also, when I originally did this, for some reason, these fonts couldn't be registered together and had to be under different font family names, but with a new way of doing things, we can fix that. So my go-to font is Ubuntu. This might change in the future actually, but like, I like this font, I like the way it looks. And as normal, when you want to import this as a CSS file or as a CSS import, you can add these link tags or the import, but that won't work for our use case. However, if you do a curl on this URL, this will give you the actual source URL for all of these fonts. Now, I don't think I need all of them, but I do want an italic version, a bold, which I believe is the 700, and a regular. So all you would have to do is just copy and paste these links into where your resume imports are, because you want them to be loaded before your PDF viewer or download link is loaded. And I think this index file is the best place for that. And I will do it right here. So font comes from renderer, and then we do register. And now I've registered the font family for Ubuntu. I have two normal typefaces, or the font weight of 400. We have the normal style and the italics. And then for bold, we have the font weight of 700. And now in your resume document, you could just create a style sheet. This one comes from React Renderer, or PDF Renderer, I mean. And we'll have to make a style sheet as like the old version of CSS and JS, because that's the only styles that React PDF will understand. You can't use your Tailwind classes, unfortunately. But to test our fonts, we're gonna just do styles.title, and this should be subtitle. And then I just need to run this and try it out in the browser. And there we go, that looks right. This is bold, and this is italicized. Now back in the editor, I just want to say I'm not gonna go too deep on styles. Essentially, a view you can treat as a div, and text you could treat as, like a paragraph or an H2 tag. The only thing that you need to keep in mind is that all of these are implicitly display flex, but if you understand basic HTML and CSS, you can get pretty far with styling your document with just the view and text. But what I do want to show is the stuff that's a little less obvious. And here I just added a little bit more CSS, but the first thing that I want to show is the page number. So the page number is just a extension of the text component. With the truthy prop of fixed, this will allow it to be shown on every page. And then it also takes in a render prop. If we check what's inside, we have page number and total pages, as well as subpage, but we don't really need to concern ourselves with that. And then there's render prop. I just want to render a string for the total or the page number out of the total pages. And then we could just style the text with the CSS that we wrote earlier. And then if we say this should be properly rendered or formatted. Now our PDF should show a little page number at the end. We have 1 out of 1. Currently there's only one page, which is correct. But the next component that is kind of special on my actual resume is this little watermark thing, as well as like these little icons. Oh yeah, these are links too. I should probably mention that. I'll do that in a bit. So first things first, there's a link component, and it's a simple component. It just takes in a source prop where you can post a URL. A bit of a gotcha, but React PDF offers a link component and an image component. And if your ESLint is set up to recognize Next.js, it might complain that you're using these components incorrectly because it's thinking it's the other one, but just something to remember. So the watermark is actually being used by a canvas component, which has a prop called paints, which accepts a function to paint on the canvas, I guess. All right, so I added a little bit of styles, and the paint function is basically an SVG construction, or it basically constructs an SVG. So we need a raw SVG path, and that's what we're gonna pass into the paint function. Now, if you're using TypeScript, it is annoying that the document is any type, but if you hover over the canvas prop, it is explicitly typed as any. So You just have to deal with it, I guess. And then with that, we'll just import it in our document and add it to our main PDF document. So that should take care of the watermark on our PDF if we refresh this. And that looks kind of nice. Now for the icons, I'm gonna switch to my old website and show what I ended up doing. Essentially, I did the same thing using the canvas component, and I have a map here, or an object, since it's JavaScript, of all the different paths, and each icon will use the canvas component and draw that icon. Also made a little helper component here to compose it with some text, so you can have the little icon and text next to each other. But there is a small problem with this, and that's these icons. So I don't actually remember where I got these paths, but you're limited to only one path, and you can't really do more SVG stuff. But this is what was available at the time. Now, however, React PDF actually ships some SVG components, and we could compose a actual SVG in a more React way, I suppose. And this way we could reference an icon library like Lucid, which is the go-to ShadCM icon library. Go to the icons and grab whatever we want. So first things first, we want @ because you should always include your email in your resume. And if we do copy SVG, we can go ahead and paste it and get the actual pathing and use other SVG components instead of just the path component. So I essentially made a port of my icons file. The big difference is now that I'm using the SVG and inner SVG components, I still have the icon map the way I structured it earlier, except now instead of a key returning a path, it's actually the key returning the inner SVG. And you'll also see the improvement, or the benefit of using these components is now you have access to the other SVG things like circle and line instead of just the path. And this is still the Lucid icon from the one that we copied and pasted for the @ symbol. One thing of note is that React PDF, each inner SVG component needs to specifically or explicitly be passed the color, and that's why I added the stroke property for both of these and passing the color. That's also why the icon map typing is returning a React component. And then of course, icon name is just the key of type of the map. But that's being used inside of our actual icon here. I don't want to export this type, so let's get rid of that. And then the icon, nothing too crazy. We're dynamically getting the inner component by taking out of the map and rendering it inside of the SVG wrapper. And the default size, the viewport is the same as the one provided by Lucid. And yeah, and also I still have that same helper component. With all of that inside of our document, now just to test things out, I added the icon text component that we created, specifying the icon of the @ symbol, and then using the text of my email address. And with that, we should get the correct icon, which this is a little small on the video, so let's make it huge, and you can see that it's rendering properly. Okay, so now the last bit of work is to just load in the JSON resume, pass it into the document as a prop, structure the document, and you pretty much have your entire PDF. And then at this moment, just to cover some bases, I made the JSON resume as a JavaScript object. That way I could give it a TypeScript type. So when I pass it into the document as a prop, I can reference the type of the resume so that I have good IntelliSense in VS Code or whatever editor you're using. And then in the subcomponents, like the heading, this is where I'm gonna specifically have just the basics portion, which is all the name and information, address and stuff. It's also important to note that since it's explicitly being sent in as a prop to the document, you can store your resume JSON anywhere else. So for example, you could change this to an async function and then do a fetch. This is in case you want to hold your JSON resume on a CDN like AWS or somewhere else. But this flexibility will allow you to just, remove the actual resume information from your codebase if you want. I am not going to do that because I am lazy. But after making a bunch of React components and structuring it and styling, everything just like normal React HTML, CSS type stuff, this is the PDF that we get. Now, it was a little bit easier for me because I had my old resume code to reference, and I probably will tweak some of the spacing because I think there's like too much spacing in between here. But it came out pretty well, and now you also have all the tools and knowledge of making your own dynamically generated Next.js PDF. If you enjoy this kind of content, consider subscribing and liking the video. And if you want to support me in other ways, you can always buy me a coffee. Thank you for watching.